You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. Everyone is familiar with the story A Christmas Carol, where Ebenezer Scrooge is visited by the spirits of Christmas past, present, and future. My guest today is the director of A Noh Christmas Carol, a Japanese spin on the timeless Charles Dickens classic. Mixing in tradition styles of kabuki theater, A Noh Christmas Carol takes us to 19th century Japan as Sukurooji Ebezo is introduced to the three ghosts of Christmas. So please welcome my guest today, Nick Ishimaru. Okay, so I want to thank you for being on the podcast today, and I'm excited for this because, as I mentioned to you briefly before the show, you are the first art director, the first show production theater that we've actually had on the podcast, so I'm excited for this.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up in theater? What got you motivated to start in theater?
So I started doing theater when I was 12 because I used to spend all of my time playing video games, and my parents told me that I had two choices. I could either join one of the local theater schools or I could play soccer because I wasn't allowed to stay at home and play video games anymore. So I picked the theater school, actually, and that was how I crashed into all of this, and that's when I started. I started doing shows when I was about 12, and then I continued doing theater through junior high and high school, and ultimately decided to do that for my major in college. And so I went to Colorado State University, got my undergraduate degree in theater and performing arts, and when I was a senior there, I had sort of crashed between theater and Japanese as my minor. And so my Japanese instructor gave me the suggestion that I start looking into traditional Japanese theater as part of my senior research, which was strongly supported by the theater department at the time. And I ended up going into a graduate program at San Francisco State University for a master's degree in drama with my emphasis in contemporary Japanese performance. And that's how I ended up here in San Francisco doing these wonderful things.
Okay. Now, when you were 12, you said you got into theater. Was it a local production? Was it through your middle school?
It was through a training school, actually. I grew up in Colorado, and we had a number of major performing arts academies all over the Front Range area, from Denver and points north. I grew up in Fort Collins, which is about an hour north of Denver, and there were at least two academies for children at the time. There might be more now, I'm not sure. And I decided to join one of them. It was just sort of like a pick one or the other. So we picked one, and I even to this day, a number of people I know that went there have gone on to become big performers or stars in various levels of performance. One of the guys I know was in the first national tour of High School Musical, so he got his equity card from that and became like a nationally known name. There were a number of people that graduated from the academy that did very, very well for themselves.
Very cool. Yeah. So Fort Collins, huh?
Yeah. Tiny town Fort Collins, home to Colorado State University and the Rams. Woo! We moved out there because my mom became a tenured professor at Colorado State University. So it's where I grew up. It's where I went for my undergraduate, and it's where I spent most of my life.
Now, you're an art director, correct?
I am the artistic director at Theater
Artistic
Ugen.
Director.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and how many productions have you directed or worked on?
At Theater of Ugen, let's see, This is only my second full production that I've directed at Theater of Ugen, but I have been working with the company since 2012 was when I did my first smaller works with them, my first smaller directing works, and I have been directing off and on since I moved to San Francisco 10 years ago. So this is 10th or so production that I've worked on. Yeah.
Wow. So obviously this is a passion of yours, and you love to do this.
Yes, I do.
What's one of the biggest benefits that you've gotten out of this?
Ooh, the biggest benefits I've gotten out of this. This isn't going to sound like it all the time, but my ability to communicate and my ability to try to impart my vision to other people, and how to use words and craft imagery using only words, and trying to come up with different tactics and strategies to develop that vision and help people get on board in the same way, and then move them all in a loosely concerted fashion to an end goal, I think is one of the things I've gained most from this.
Interesting. So you said learning how to use words.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't always show up, like it might not today. But learning, like when you want to create a production or you want to create a piece of theater, you start with a vision. At least I start with a vision in my mind of what I want this thing to look like. But because I am not the sole figure creating this whole thing, I don't want actor puppets. I'm not looking for an artist to exactly specifically render this thing that I have in my mind. Because if that was the case, I would just design the shows myself. But I am instead trying to give an idea of what I want something to look like, and beyond just the literal visual of I would like a red house with white snow on it with a blue background. Beyond that, I want to think about what kinds of emotions I want it to evoke, what kinds of thoughts or feelings I want to come out of this piece. Like in Christmas Carol, in the original script, it talks about many of the Christmas ghosts climbing out of a well. And so I said, okay, well, we want a well, but what is the well? What does it represent? What does it mean? And I was thinking, well, let's go more in the direction perhaps of like a clock and talking about the passage of time. And so when I told that to my scenic designer, I was like, I want a clock and I want something that helps us get a more minimal sense of the passage of time, a minimalist perspective. He ended up creating this large full moon thing. It's like it looks sort of like a full moon partially through an eclipse, and we ended up staging the show in such a way that the ghosts emerge through this moon and make gestures to indicate the face of a clock. And because of its circularity, it's like you're looking down on a well from overhead. So we took all these different ideas and trying different tactics and different wording, trying to sculpt a mutual image rather than just like, I want a standing grandfather clock that people walk out of, which is not at all what we ended up with. And I'm very pleased with that because it was a nice way of taking what I had in my mind and finding out what a scenic designer has in his mind. Our scenic designer, Josh, is fantastic. What he had in his mind and bringing him together into a living world that was then something that we had all worked to create. And that's one of my greatest joys as a director. And that's what I mean by using my words to come up with something that is representative of all the different artistic visions that are involved in this piece rather than just me saying, I want you to go and make me a red house and a grandfather clock. Because that's just it's not as creative that way.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, so how does the whole planning look like for a production? I mean, it sounds like a lot of work.
It is. We, depending on the show, will begin production work anywhere from 8 months to 18 months in advance, depending on what our funding cycle is going to look like. And for a small nonprofit like Theater of Yugen, we rely very heavily on grant funding. And our grant funding, like for example, I have a show that I'm working on next October, and I had to submit the grants for that last February. So that would be 18.
So you have to have a budget prepared well in advance.
Yeah, so I started putting the budget together a year ago, last November. So in November of 2016 for a show that's going to go up in November of 2018.
Wow.
And that was just like loose ideas of, okay, I know that I'm probably going to need this many performers. I'm going to need the following certain people to work on the show. And just getting a rough idea of like, well, what can we afford to pay, what we cannot. And then once we get that squared away and we actually get to the real production work, it's about assembling a team. And I like to assemble my production team about a year in advance. So that way we'll have ample time to work on designs and work on hashing things out. The shows that I've worked on at Theater of Yugen have all been pre-scripted, which is a good benefit for me because it means I don't have to spend anywhere between 12 to 24 months writing a script and refining a script and working with a playwright. So that can sometimes add another year onto the process if that's what you're doing. So anyway, this Christmas Carol was a pre-scripted work. And so I pulled together my production team about this time last year, started talking about it and figuring out what we wanted to do and get some of the ideas out there. And then we really started to come together in April or May. I think it was April this year, and started doing more of like the sketching ideas and getting some basic rendering, some color ideas, some fabric swatches from my costume designer, and started talking about like positioning and rough ideas of what we wanted. But all that process happened long before we cast and long before actors get anywhere near the stage. And that's the sort of the early pre-planning for basically any production is that. So you want to make sure you know, if you need to hire a composer, if you need to hire a sound designer, definitely scene, light, costume. Those three are always required. Whether or not you'll need another person to handle props, whether that will fall to scenic or costume, depending on the show. In this case, we hired a composer and a sound designer. So I have 5 people in my core production team, in addition to my stage manager, who is the liaison between myself and the actors.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I would imagine it's like incredible just to see it all come together at the end.
It is. It is that last week. And the funny thing is, we start work on this a year to year and a half in advance, and then suddenly it's just the last 5 days before you open that everything gets thrown together, and it feels like absolute chaos. I have never been part of a production that I can remember anyway, where Tech Week, the last week before you open, does not feel just like an absolute mad dash to the finish line. I came to theater as an actor, and so I was used to feeling like, oh, I have all this time to rehearse. And you usually get anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks of rehearsal, depending on how intense the rehearsal process is, and thinking like, oh, this is why is this taking so long? Why does all this tech stuff seem to take so long? And then when I really started directing when I was in college, realizing that the tech actors get 8 weeks of rehearsal, that's great. Tech gets 3 nights. And they get 3 shots to make this right before you open. If in a rushed process, if you're really, really lucky, they might get 5 rehearsals, including their first rehearsal with no actors. It can be very difficult to get all of that together in that last week, and realizing like the year and a half of all this planning work suddenly comes down to 5 very short days where you just throw this all together and then make it all come to life. And it's almost, I'm describing in these messy, chaotic terms. It's very carefully planned and regimented, but it feels chaotic and messy, and it feels miraculous when suddenly the curtain goes up on your first preview and you have a show, and suddenly you have an actual watchable piece of theater that's quite stunning.
Now, when the curtains open and the show starts, is it more exciting or more nerve-wracking for you?
For the last couple of productions for me, since this one and the show I directed last year, Red Demon, were my 2 big productions as artistic director, I was terrified because after you've worked on something for so long and you've looked at it so closely, you sort of lose perspective on exactly do things really work? Does the show actually come together? Is this really working out? And a really good director, someone who has a lot of experience, is able to just say, yes, this is working. Objectively, no, this is not working. But because I am still sort of new in my career in that way, it was a big challenge for me to say, this is really good, this is not working, this is working, this is not. And I was just terrified to think, did this come together? Are we going to make it through this? And Christmas Carol, I've been really pleased. Audience feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Critics have loved it, and it's very clear that this piece really landed. It's working really nicely. And I was so relieved after opening night to be getting that feedback. But up until then, every moment, everything you watch is just, is this working? Is this good? Is this beautiful? Am I creating a piece that really means something powerful?
Now, are there times where you start you have opening night, and then maybe 1 or 2 nights down the road, you make some tweaks to the actual play?
Oh yeah, we've been doing that, definitely. We've had a line change here and there. We have sometimes we have to look at sound levels. Sometimes we have to look at set dressing. Sometimes disaster strikes and costumes are gone, and they for whatever reason they fall apart and we're not able to use them anymore. So we might have to replace a piece or a garment here or there. The theater, no matter what, is always a live art, and it will always continue to evolve no matter what happens. So the show that you open on opening night will probably be very similar to what you see at closing night, but I have seen longer runs of shows where it becomes a very different production by the time it's done, whether blocking slowly changes over time or line deliveries change over time. And as the actors continue to perform, because it's not like a movie where you get it once, it's in the can, and that's what you're going to see for the rest of forever. Every night, the actors are making new discoveries. They're discovering new things about their roles and about themselves that make the show something completely different after a while.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So even the actors themselves will make little tweaks.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Whether it's like a line delivery here, a change of facing there, a smaller gesture here, a bigger gesture there, all of that can make for a very different experience.
Very neat. Now, during the actual performance, what are you specifically doing? Are you backstage? Are you maybe in front watching the entire performance?
For me, it really, at Theater View, again, it really depends. Our staff is very small. We only have 4 paid staff members. And I have a very wonderful board that does a lot of volunteer work for us. And so we run the front of house, whether that is checking people in a box office and selling tickets or selling concessions or making sure that patron needs are being seen to in the lobby. I can take care of a lot of those positions. Like last week, I was house manager for 2 nights, and then I sold concessions at the bar for the other night. This weekend, I am going to be watching the show on Friday, and I'll be concessions again on Sunday. And it's not always usual for a director to be there every night of the show. Usually, directing is more like a contracting gig. So you come in, you get the show ready, maybe you go through opening night, you might come back once or twice in the course of a run, and the director really won't be seen that much again. Because we have a rep company, we do it quite a bit differently. I'll be there every night, but whether I'll be backstage or in the house or in the lobby, it kind of depends on the night.
Okay. Now you've mentioned the Theater of Yugen multiple times already. So let's talk about the actual theater.
Yeah.
Where's it located? How long? I think I read online that it started in 1978, correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Theater of Yugen is currently located at 2840 Mariposa Street in San Francisco. We are part of the Project Artaud complex, which is the oldest live-work complex in San Francisco. Project Artaud was founded in the early 70s. We are not a founding member of Project Artaud. But all of our neighbors are living and working artists, and many people do live in their spaces full time. Theater of Yugen was founded in 1978 by a woman named Yuriko Doi, who moved from Tokyo to the Bay Area. She came to pursue a graduate degree in directing, and she was already trained in classical Japanese theater when she moved here. And at the urging of a number of her teachers, she came to the United States to develop a career. We were founded then in 78 by her and a number of students that she had met at San Francisco State University. So that old school connection coming back there, completely coincidental, but feeding our lineage yet again. And they started by doing traditional Japanese comedy, which is called kyogen. Yuriko has been very fond and very fanatical about kyogen for most of her life. And so they started doing that. And that was how Theater of Yugen came to be. And about 27 years ago, we moved into our space now in the Project Artaud complex.
Okay. Now, Japanese theater is amongst one of the oldest styles, correct?
That is correct. There are a number of different kinds of Japanese theater. The oldest living theater form in the world is called Noh, and along with its comedic counterpart Kyogen, they have been continuously performed from teacher to student and performer to performer since the late 1300s, so almost 700 years now.
Wow.
They are, yes, that makes them then the oldest continuously living theater form around right now. Noh, when it was founded, was a popular art, and it was very quickly taken by the upper class, by the samurai class, and became a state art. A very famous figure in Noh history was given state patronage, and he was given access to a high education that many people in the 1300s were not able to have. And it impressed upon him the importance of poetry and of literary aesthetics and visual aesthetic. And he created we say he helped bring Noh into its current state of refinement. Because it became a state art and was used for ceremonial purposes as well as entertainment purposes, it has a meditative, ritual-like quality to it. It can be described as very slow for some people, especially Westerners. We're used to a much faster pace of life. It is a heavily masked drama, so most of the lead performers wear masks to indicate their character, and most of the plays are meditative, poetic reflections on different philosophical states through a Buddhist lens. So it began as a Buddhist style of performance, and the performances were geared towards a catharsis of a sorts, where audiences would be able to witness this long-suffering figure who had remained on Earth due to their attachments, emotional desires, and needs associated with some thing or person. And a priest would come and find the ghost of this person and then pray for that spirit, and the spirit would then be released from the cycle of death and rebirth, essentially achieve nirvana. That is what most Noh plays are like. Whether that main character is a woman who is suffering for the love of a man that she once had, or a warrior who is suffering over his karmic duty because he was bound in life to fight. That was his birth station. But murder, in no matter what cause, is always an unnatural act. And so he was torn between his duty and spiritual truth, essentially. And so a priest would come and pray for that suffering to be released.
So there's a lot of very deep meaning.
Very. Noh is very deep, very symbolic, very heady kind of material. It's very poetic and gorgeous. And that's actually where the main name of our company, Yugen, comes from. Yugen, roughly translated, means like profound elegance or subtle grace or deep beauty. And it talks about a kind of beauty that is felt rather than a beauty that is seen. We talk about it in poetic imagery, like if you are looking up into the night sky, on a cloudy night, and just as you look up, the clouds part and you see the full moon, the feeling you get as you see the moon through the parting clouds, that feeling is Yugen. And that's the kind of energy and emphasis we try to captivate or capture in our performances. It's something that's very strongly brought on by Noh. And Kyogen, the comedic counterpart to that, are almost the exact opposite. They are satirical plays that upend the social order, and they are satirical pieces that lampoon the people in power. They are John Everyman characters. Almost every play begins with someone walking out on stage and saying, "I am a person of this area." So identifying they are just like the audience, and they'll say, "I have an errand to run in another part of town, and so I'm going to have someone look over my house or watch my house." Or my neighbor has a lot of melons, and I really want those melons, so I'm going to go steal some. And that's how Kyogen plays start. They're much shorter, they're much more colloquial, they're about everyday things, but Kyogen and Noh share the same heart, that idea of trying to create a human experience that we can all relate to.
And both styles have been around about the same amount of time?
Yeah. Some people, especially Kyogen performers, believe that Kyogen is actually older than Noh, but it's very difficult to document that. We don't have a through line of succession of written records to prove that that's true. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest that Kyogen is probably the older of the two forms, actually.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, how did the idea of mixing the style of Noh with Christmas Carol come about?
Yeah, good question. It came about because, as I was saying, Noh is about watching people being released from their suffering, right? And Theater of Yugen has a strong interest in taking European literature and more Western-style drama, Western-based drama, and finding how that can intersect in a creative way with classical Japanese drama. And so if you look at the story of A Christmas Carol, what you're really looking at is the story of a man who is being saved from a fate of long suffering and of attachment to his material wealth. The Scrooge figure, a person who has become so obsessed with his material goods that he's unable to see anything else. And as the ghost of Jacob Marley tells him, if you don't do something else with your life, you too will become what we would call in a Buddhist sense a hungry ghost, a person who is bound by their attachments and their suffering over their money and unable to go anywhere after death. And so then Scrooge has this journey where he meets these other spirits who tell him stories, give him visions, and essentially pray for him and allow him to experience an expiation of his sins, of his attachment, and of his need for things. And so in that way, the plays are... The Christmas Carol is a sort of a Dickensian Noh on its face. Like the dramatic structure is very much the same. And so we were very interested in taking that story and telling it in that Noh lens, and of using the more Buddhist parable rather than the Christian parable to talk about the story.
Okay. Very interesting. So what are the lessons learned from the play similar to the original tale?
So because this is more of a Buddhist telling rather than a Christian telling, it's not about the idea of Christian charity and that giving away your wealth is like a way to salvation. The angle we're taking, especially in light of the 2016 election and the absolute mess that has become 2017 politically, we're looking at this as a reconnection to community. That only in connecting to other beings and remembering that we go through life together, that no matter what you have or what you want to do, that you are always impacting others or others are always impacting you. And we have to be mindful of our communities and remember what communities we're part of. In this case, we take the idea of charity and make it about reconnecting to the community, giving back to the people that are around you that you have gone on your voyage with, and making sure that you remember what part you play in that world and how you can connect to one another. I think that's really critical for us right now in America to remember that we are part of a larger community, whether that is an identity community that we have created for ourselves, whether that it's a familial community, an economic community, a political community, or even to grandly on a national level, a national community. That is really the critical thing to take out of Christmas Carol this year, and that's what our production tells, is that critical reminder. That's how we alleviate suffering for one another. That's how we help each other get through the world, by remembering that we are a unified people.
I love that. Yeah, the focus on the community.
Yeah.
Now, I also read on the website, and you sent us a few links regarding the Noh Christmas Carol, that your plays typically, historically, it's played by majority men, and your cast now is majority women, correct?
Yes. In most of the traditional forms of Japanese theater, up until very recently, it was exclusively male. Kabuki, there are three major forms of traditional theater people talk about, which Noh and Kyogen, which I've already mentioned, and Kabuki, which was a little bit later invention. It was created in the 1600s rather than the 1400s, and it was a popular art, is still a popular art. Kabuki is exclusively male on a professional level because it's controlled by a single corporation, so they don't give contracts to women. Noh was exclusively female on the professional level until very recently. Maybe 20 years ago or so. And I know that the number of women who've been recognized professionally is very small. I think it's under 20 still. And Kyogen, the comedic form, again, has no professionally recognized women in it. So these are very male-dominated, masculine art forms that, even though they frequently tell stories of women, the styles have been developed about how to make a man portray a woman on stage. And there's then that special irony that our theater company is founded by a woman who actually moved to the United States because she was told by her Kyogen teachers, Kyogen is unlikely to change in the near future in Japan, and that if she wanted to have a career, that she should move to the U.S., where she could take her substantial skill and knowledge and become a professional performer and have her own Kyogen company. And that's where Theater of Yugen really originated from, was that idea. So she started a company with 4 other women, and throughout Theater of Yugen's history, we have been led predominantly by women. Most of our performers are female. And even though we're doing the classical repertoire, which is all mostly plays about men by men, they've all been performed by women, and our audience is predominantly female. So it's a really interesting change that we've got. And one of the things that that caused is, for Theater of Yugen, then when we cast, we very rarely take gender or the gender of the performer into consideration when casting a show. We do try to give female characters to female-bodied performers, just to make sure that we're keeping up representation of female performers in the company. But it's not always the case. I have played female roles in many of our productions, and I know a number of women have played, and obviously then women have played male roles through most of our shows. So gender is not usually a huge considering factor when we cast. And so when I looked at Christmas Carol this time around, I was actually interested in getting predominantly female performers for our roles and seeing what that would be like, how that would influence the reading of the text.
So who are the main performers for the Noh Christmas Carol?
So our main performers, in alphabetical order, we've got Annika Bergman, who is playing all of the supporting male roles. She plays the Bob Cratchit figure. She plays the Scrooge's nephew, the Fred character. She plays Scrooge's headmaster, and a number of the other smaller roles. We've got Shannon Davis, who plays Scrooge. In this case, his name is Sukurooji. Sukurooji Ebezo is the Japaneseified version of his name. Adrian Dean is playing the 3 Christmas ghosts of past, present, and future. Micah Kavita is playing all of the supporting women. So the Cratchit's wife, the young love of Scrooge, whose name is Suzu in this iteration. the girlfriend of Scrooge's nephew, and a number of other supporting characters. And then the only male-bodied performer we have is Jacob Ritz, who is playing the ghost of Jacob Marley. So Jacob is Jacob. His name is Mashima Jakube in this iteration. And what we've done with this to create a more otherworldly sense for Mashima, Jacob pre-recorded all of his lines, and we had them digitally altered and did a lot of sound work with it. So he's not actually speaking live during the show. It's pre-recorded and piped in through all points of the house, and he is moving out of sync and speaking out of time with his own dialogue. So he's sort of this otherworldly, disembodied figure, and in that way, then the only 4 living performers are female cast.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So does everyone have a mic on?
No, actually, no one is mic'd.
It's all pre-recorded.
No, Jacob's lines are pre-recorded. Everyone else is live. Our house is very small. We're only 60 seats, and it's not much more than 50 feet from the edge of the house to the back, from the front to the back. So it's very easy to hear everybody. And when you're doing traditional training, we train our voices to be very loud, to be heard in a much larger outdoor space without any amplification. Yeah.
What does training entail for that?
It's a lot of breath support. All 4 of our women have vocal backgrounds, so they are all singers in some degree. You do a lot of the same work that you would with training with singing. So it's a lot of air from the diaphragm, many vocal warm-ups about pushing air up through the proper resonating chambers, the things like that. And we do different kinds of diction exercises. We do a bunch of tongue twisters. We have some martial arts exercises that we bring in that are designed to help amplify and create sound. And that's just the vocal work, in addition to all the physical work then that you do to prepare the body to be able to execute this kind of theater.
Is this all stuff that you work with the performers on, or you expect them to do it on their own?
Oh, no. We work very heavily with our performers to make sure that the training is a large part of the rehearsal process. And actually, in the case of Christmas Carol, because we're working with performers who have never worked with Theater Vugen before, and Theater Vugen prides itself on using very physical theater and using a very physical style of performance, we spent the first 6 weeks of our rehearsal period doing nothing but learning traditional Japanese theater forms. We had a solid week of rehearsals with kabuki professionals from Japan. Then Yuriko Sensei, our founder, came in and did Kyogen rehearsals with my cast, and then I led them through a number of no exercises. And between those 3 things, then we found a new physical vocabulary to use for the show, and we worked on absolutely nothing but the traditional forms and just trained for 6 solid weeks before we even picked up the text and started looking at the play at all. And then we staged the play over the course of 5 weeks after we had done 6 weeks of training. So the rehearsal process for this show was substantially longer than actors usually get for a show.
Now, is this all the kabuki training?
We just did 1 week of kabuki. The other 5 weeks were rehashing what we had done in that, and then adding in Kyogen and No on top of that.
Okay.
So it was a bunch of different stuff that we did in that training process.
Okay, and then kabuki training. What does that specifically entail?
Well, kabuki training, kabuki is another form of traditional Japanese theater, and so we did a lot of voice training, similar grounding exercises, a lot of training about how to walk, how to gesture, how to move the head and the torso and the body.
Okay, so it's very physical then.
Yes. No, Kyogen and kabuki are all extremely physical theaters. And what's interesting is because kabuki is sort of a descendant of No and Kyogen, the very core grounding for all 3 is the same. So we start with the same basic principles of sound. We start with the same basic principles of how to stand and how to hold the body. I don't know if you've done any martial arts training or have any experience.
I did it years ago.
But they teach you. But they teach. Oh, so since you did karate, did they teach you kamae or your basic stances?
Yes.
So we actually use that word kamae in theater as well.
Okay.
It's the Japanese word for stance, and the kamae for No, Kyogen, and kabuki is all rooted in the same basic thing. It's quite a bit different than the one in karate, but we still train. Our first session was, how do you stand in a kamae? What is our kamae, and how do you get into it? We spent 5 hours working on just that. And it was this, and since it's the same, or essentially the same for all 3, that was our beginning point. And then we learned like how to walk. And again, there's walking techniques that are shared between all three forms. So it was a good basic grounding. And then as we got further into the training, we started to add more of the flourishes, which get very different then between the three forms. Like how you might point in each form is very different. How you might indicate or talk to another person is very different in each form. And how
how would that work? How would you point to people in each form?
Like in No, you're almost always holding a fan in your right hand. And so if you were to point to someone using a no gesture, you would raise up your right arm in like an underhanded gesture and point to them with the end of your fan, keeping your arm slightly curved. I don't want to get too detailed in the description, but it was sort of an underhanded point with a fan. If you were doing it in Kyogen, you would point to somebody, but it would be again, an underhanded gesture, but probably without a fan. And you could use either the left or the right hand, depending on how you're facing on stage would actually change that. And you can do either the underhanded gesture, or you might be able to get more of a gesture from the shoulder or overhanded, depending on what your emphasis is.
And will you use a hand facing the audience?
The one away from the audience.
Away.
We would call it your upstage hand. You want to use your upstage hand for that most of the time. And then in kabuki, depending on the gender of the character you're playing and the type of character you're playing, you can either do more of a Western style point with the index finger in a direction. You can point with a whole hand. You might actually do like an open fist sort of angry gesture, forceful pointing at something, and it can be left or right hand, over or under. It's very much about the style of the moment and what you're trying to communicate rather than a specificity of the form at that point.
Now, does the Yugen Theater have classes to teach the public?
We do. We do. We try to offer training 2 times a year. We do a basic training, like a very intro to Kyogen training, intro to No and Kyogen. And once a year, we try to do a more intermediate to advanced level where we actually start teaching people a little bit of a play itself. And we try to use that class as a jumping off point to being able to do production work with the company. We do regular education outreach gigs all around the Bay Area, probably 10 to 12 times a year. And it's usually like school assemblies for elementary school students. Sometimes it's guest teaching gigs at high schools. Sometimes it's, especially in the spring, performances at the various Japanese cultural festivals around the Bay Area. And we're always needing people to be able to show them, like, we need you for 2 hours on this day. Here's your stipend. Let's go ahead and get this together. And it's like, if you don't already know the repertoire, then it's really hard to just get people up there and go. So we take that intermediate training class as the bridge point between our newcomers and the people we're actually performing with.
So let's talk about the makeup in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Who does the makeup? How long does that take? It's very elaborate, very detailed.
Oh, yeah. So all the makeup designs you're looking at are kabuki makeup designs. No and Kyogen don't use makeup at all because they use so much mask work. And if you put makeup on your face and then put on a mask, you're going to ruin the mask. So the makeup designs are primarily kabuki based. I was the primary makeup designer for it, but my actress Shannon Davis, playing Sukurooji, she has also done kabuki work at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And so between the two of us, we took some pre-existing makeup designs. Kabuki is very specific in its designs and the kinds of characters that use what kinds of makeup, and we altered them slightly to come up with her makeup design. We used a very standard female makeup design for one of the Christmas ghosts, and then added a couple extra touches to make it more Christmassy. But she and I took care of most of that, and she helped the other actors learn how to put on their makeup. And it usually takes them... It takes Shannon 2.5 hours to get ready before the show.
Wow.
And the guy playing Mashima, Jacob, the one playing Mashima, since he has to paint his entire body from head to toe in white every night before the show.
Head to toe?
Head to toe. Yep. He does his entire body. He's using a much more avant-garde performance style called Butoh, which means the dance of darkness. And in that style, you paint your body head to toe in white. And most of the time in that form, you're actually performing in the nude. Which we don't usually do in the States. But so he paints himself completely in white. He takes about 2 hours to get completely painted. Dean, to do just her one makeup design, is about 1:45, something like that. It's a very elaborate and extensive process. It takes a lot of time.
So I assume there's no makeup changes during the show,
no,
is there?
No, absolutely not. There's not time for it.
So it's only costume changes.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of costume changes.
A lot of running around backstage.
A lot of that. And our backstage is very small, so our poor actors are running around frantically the entire time. But it's worth it. It creates a very seamless and beautiful experience. You would never know how much they're working backstage. It's fantastic.
So let's talk about opening night.
Yeah.
I know we briefly touched on it earlier, but sounds like it went extremely well.
It did.
You had a after party afterwards to
We did.
celebrate. How did that go?
It was great. We do an opening night reception for basically every production that we have. We get a lot of things donated. This year we got some fantastic donations from Arizmendi Bakery on 9th Street over in the city, and Dandelion Chocolate, which has been a regular donor for us. And from Rainbow Foods, which is a local co-op grocery store really close to our theater. They donate for us pretty frequently. And so what we did this year is we took the bread and the pizzas that were given to us by Arizmendi and the chocolate from Dandelion. And one of our board members is a former professional chef. So he took the donation we got from Rainbow and created a whole set of hors d'oeuvres to go along with this. And we bought a bunch of champagne and served that just out in the theater so people could mingle and talk with the cast, talk with the production crew, walk around on set and see the set, and enjoy this absolutely incredible spread that Alex Sinclair made for us. It was a really delightful evening. People loved it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Now, how long is this play going for?
So we close on Christmas Eve. We play Friday, Saturday, Sunday this weekend, next weekend, and the weekend after. It's Fridays and Saturdays at 7 and Sundays at 4. Sunday, 4 o'clock on December 24th is our closing night.
Great. Now, to buy tickets, people can go online to the website.
Yep, go to the website, www.theaterofugen.org. It's theater spelled Theatre. Eugen is Yugen.
And I assume they can also go and check out classes if they want to participate in the beginner courses.
Yes. When we do have our class schedule announced, it'll be up on the website, and you can also join our mailing list there on the website, and we'll be able to. We send out that information. We send out a newsletter at least once a month. We try to get it out twice a month if we can.
How many productions are there at the theater per year? Is it usually just one?
For our productions, we try to do 4 a year. We do one big one in the fall and one big one in the spring. And then we try to do, or we always do a work in progress series. We started it a couple years ago for local Bay Area artists to bring together various works in progress at different stages on a common theme. We do that in July. And then this year we have another smaller production that we're doing actually just on New Year's Eve, the Fermentation Symposium, which is about combining the aesthetics of food and the aesthetics of theater into a single evening. Wow. So those are our 4 big shows this year.
And are you having to file grants for every single one?
Yes. Yeah, we file grant support for every one of those. And then the ones that we aren't able to get grant support for, then of course donor support is always extremely appreciated.
Fundraisers, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We are a full 501c3, so all donations to us are tax deductible. Yeah, we thrive on donor support and individual contributions.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and link you guys up.
That'd be fantastic.
On the description, everywhere,
Yeah.
any way we can
That'd be
to
great.
help.
Thank you.
I definitely want to go check out this show.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Love to have you. Let me know what night you'd like to come.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely let you know. So I want to thank you for being on the podcast here. It was a lot of fun, a lot of really good information here.
Thanks. Yeah, we are the only company in the world that does Kyogen in English. So I'm one of the few people that is actually really able to talk about this and talk about it from both a practical and academic perspective.
So the only one in the world that does it in English.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, at least for the traditional Japanese comedy. Some of the other universities around the world do it like once every couple of years, but we're the only company that does it full time, and we are the only permanent theater company in America that does No right now as well.
Do you have any plans to eventually take the production on the road?
Not this one. We have toured other productions globally before. We've been obviously Japan. We've been as far as Sarajevo in South Africa with different shows. We have gone all across the globe with productions before.
And you have to take all the equipment,
Yep.
costumes, everything with you.
Yep, everything. That's why we try to go fairly minimalist with our productions.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to, we can store them easily and remount them quickly.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And you're knocking out 4 big productions per year.
2 big ones right now, 2 smaller ones.
So what's the next one coming up?
Fermentation Symposium for 2 nights at the end of December, and then we're doing Power Plays, which is going to be a showcase of 4 classic Kyogen plays in May. We're doing 6 performances in May, and then 2 nights of the Yugen in Action work in progress series in July. That'll be our season.
excited to see all of them.
Yeah, hopefully you can make it to all of them. I'd love to have you there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So thank you again for being on the podcast, and maybe we'll do this again sometime next year, and we'll recap your new productions coming up.
That sounds fantastic. I would love that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at markguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.